Has this ever happened to you, where the very bedrock of what society expects from men becomes the invisible chains that bind their souls? We laud strength, stoicism, and unwavering resolve, often equating these qualities with an absence of vulnerability. Yet, beneath the polished armor of composure, a silent war often rages, a conflict of suppressed emotion and unacknowledged pain. This isn't merely about personal struggle. It's a pervasive cultural narrative, deeply ingrained in the collective unconscious, that dictates a man's worth by his ability to withstand without faltering, to provide without complaint, to protect without needing protection. This unspoken covenant of strength can lead to profound isolation, leaving men adrift in a sea of unexpressed grief, fear, and longing, all hidden beneath a veneer of unshakable masculinity. The cost of this strength, then, is often the very essence of their authentic selves, sacrificed at the altar of societal expectation. Elias had been carved from the rugged, unyielding stone of his ancestral lands. From the tender age when most boys chased butterflies, Elias was chasing cattle through thorny brush, his small hands already calloused, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon with a practiced, hardened gaze. His father, a man of few words and immense physical fortitude, had instilled in him the creed of the mountain. Endure, provide, never show weakness. The mountain did not weep, nor did it bend, and neither should a man. Elias absorbed these lessons not just in his mind, but in his very bones. His childhood home, perched precariously on a cliff overlooking a tempestuous sea, mirrored the life he was taught to live unyielding, exposed to the elements, yet standing firm against all odds. There was no room for tears, no space for doubt, only the relentless pursuit of self-reliance. When his mother, a gentle soul who hummed lullabies Elias could barely remember, succumbed to a swift illness, his father's response was a stoic nod and a renewed dedication to work. Grief, for them, was a private matter, an internal furnace whose fires were to be stoked in silence, never allowed to show their smoke. Elias learned to bury his own burgeoning sorrow deep within, adding it to the growing subterranean reservoir of unaddressed emotions. He was 10 and already a fortress. Years passed, and Elias grew into a man who embodied the ideals of his upbringing. He was the first to offer help, the last to complain, his shoulders broad enough to carry the burdens of an entire community. When the fishing boats needed repair after a violent storm, it was Elias who worked through the nights, his hands bleeding, his eyes etched with fatigue, but his resolve unwavering. When a neighbor's barn burned, he was there, axe in hand, pulling smoldering timbers with a grim determination that inspired others. He built his own successful carpentry business from nothing but raw timber and sweat, his creations renowned for their robust craftsmanship and intricate detail. People admired him, relied on him, and spoke of his unwavering strength as if it were a natural phenomenon, like the tides or the changing seasons. He had married a kind woman, Elias, whose warmth provided a gentle contrast to his inherent reserve. They had 2 children, a spirited daughter and a quiet son, and Elias was a devoted, if often distant, father. He provided everything they needed, ensuring their comfort and security with an almost obsessive dedication. Yet, in the quiet hours of the night, when Elias slept soundly beside him, Elias often found himself staring at the ceiling, a profound emptiness gnawing at his insides. He had built an empire of stoicism, but within its walls, he felt like a lone sentinel, forever on guard. The cracks began to show subtly, like hairline fractures in ancient stone. Small things at first, a sudden, uncharacteristic flare of anger when a minor inconvenience arose, a growing impatience with his son's youthful anxieties, which Elias dismissed as weakness, an increasing reliance on long, solitary walks by the stormy shore, where the crashing waves seemed to echo the turmoil he refused to acknowledge within himself. Elias, perceptive and gentle, noticed the shift. She would try to reach him, her soft words like feathers against his armor. "Are you all right, Elias? You seem distant." He would always respond with a gruff, "I'm fine, just tired," and quickly change the subject. The truth was, he didn't know how not to be fine. He didn't have the language for anything else. To admit otherwise felt like a betrayal of everything he was taught, a collapse of the very identity he had so painstakingly constructed. He had become a master of repression, pushing every uncomfortable feeling, every flicker of self-doubt, into the shadowy depths of his unconscious. This was his shadow work, but it was the shadow's unacknowledged dominion, not its integration. The unexpressed pain, however, did not vanish. It merely transformed, festering beneath the surface. He projected his own unexamined fear of inadequacy onto others, seeing their vulnerability as a threat, their emotional expression as a sign of fragility he could not afford. This ego projection created a chasm between him and those he loved, isolating him even further. The turning point came with the relentless rain. Weeks of it, an unending deluge that turned the once familiar landscape into a treacherous bog. The river, usually a docile companion, swelled into a raging torrent, threatening the homes nestled along its banks. Elias, true to form, was at the forefront of the rescue efforts, directing men, shoring up defenses. His face grim with exhaustion but his will unbroken. They worked tirelessly, but the river was merciless. One night, a levee broke, sending a devastating surge of water into the lower village. Elias, without hesitation, plunged into the icy depths to rescue a trapped family. He pulled them out, one by one, his powerful strokes defying the current, his lungs burning. He delivered them to safety, shivering and coughing, but alive. As the last child was lifted from his arms, a small, terrified girl, she looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Elias. You saved us." And in that moment, something shifted. Not immediately, not dramatically, but a tiny fissure appeared in his granite facade. He had always been the rescuer, the protector, but in her innocent gratitude, he saw not his strength, but the terrifying fragility of life and his own raw, unacknowledged fear of failure. Later that night, back in his home, the smell of damp earth clinging to him, he sat by the dying embers of the fire. Alara approached him, her face etched with concern. She didn't speak, but simply placed a hand gently on his arm. And then, for the first time in over 30 years, Elias wept. Not a sob, not a wail, but a quiet, trembling stream of tears that ran down his weathered cheeks. It was the undoing of a lifetime of suppression, the release of a reservoir of grief, fear, and exhaustion he had carried in silent solitude. The archetype Elias embodied was that of the hero, but one tragically burdened by the societal blueprint of invulnerability. He was the unwavering provider, the stoic protector, a man whose strength was his identity, yet simultaneously his greatest prison. His struggle was a poignant testament to the shadow at play, the disowned emotions, the fears of inadequacy, the longing for connection, all relegated to the unconscious because they did not fit the rigid definition of masculinity he had internalized. The narrative of his life reveals the profound cost of denying the full spectrum of human experience. His repression manifested as emotional distance, bursts of anger, and a pervasive sense of isolation. The journey toward healing for such an individual begins not with the acquisition of more strength, but with the courage to acknowledge profound vulnerability. Individuation, in Elias's case, commenced when the external crisis of the flood fractured his internal defenses, forcing a confrontation with his hidden depths. His tears were not a sign of weakness, but the first vital step towards wholeness, a necessary shattering of the ego's rigid construct. For you, perhaps, the constant striving, the relentless giving, the quiet carrying of burdens without complaint mirrors Elias's path. You might find yourself caught in the silent pact of stoicism, believing that admitting need or expressing pain diminishes your worth. But true strength, the kind that endures and truly empowers, is not the absence of vulnerability, but the courage to embrace it. Consider the wisdom of stoicism, not as a call to emotional numbness, but as a discipline of rational engagement with one's inner world, a recognition that while external events are beyond your control, your internal response is not. Seneca observed that to be everywhere is to be nowhere. Similarly, to be everything for everyone else, yet nothing for oneself, leads to a profound inner void. Your journey of healing begins by recognizing the silent narratives you carry. What emotions have you deemed unacceptable to express? What vulnerabilities have you hidden, even from yourself? Begin to cultivate a practice of gentle introspection, perhaps through quiet moments of reflection, journaling, or simply allowing yourself to feel without judgment. Just as Elias found release in the presence of his compassionate wife, seek out safe spaces and trusted individuals where genuine emotional expression is not only permitted but encouraged. This doesn't mean unleashing a torrent of unchecked emotion, but rather a slow, deliberate process of acknowledging and integrating those parts of yourself that have been exiled. True power lies not in the denial of pain, but in its conscious acceptance and compassionate integration. You are not defined by the burdens you carry in silence, but by the courage to unpack them, piece by painstaking piece, and to rediscover the authentic self beneath the layers of enforced resilience. What would you think if I told you that the very drive to achieve, to conquer, to relentlessly pursue success, often conceals a profound internal wound, a deep-seated fear of not being enough? This relentless striving, so often celebrated as ambition, can be a desperate attempt to fill an inner void, a way to outrun the echoes of perceived inadequacy. The pursuit of external validation, whether through professional accolades, financial prosperity, or even physical prowess, can become a substitute for genuine self-worth, leaving a hollow ache that no amount of worldly success can truly satisfy. This ceaseless performance, built on the shifting sands of external approval, often masks the silent agony of a soul yearning for authentic acceptance, both from others and, crucially, from itself. Arthur's life had been a meticulously constructed edifice of triumph. From his earliest memories, he understood that love, or at least its visible manifestations, was conditional. His father, a man of imposing intellect and an even more imposing critical eye, measured affection in accolades. A perfect report card earned a rare, approving nod. A victory on the football field garnered a moment of paternal pride that felt like sunshine breaking through clouds. Failure, however, was met with a chilling silence, a withdrawal of warmth that felt like a personal winter. Arthur learned quickly that to be seen, to be acknowledged, he had to excel. He became a prodigy of performance, driven by an insatiable hunger for that elusive approval. He devoured books, mastered instruments, dominated sports, always pushing, always striving for the next peak. The boy who was afraid of failing transformed into a young man who was afraid of not succeeding, the subtle but significant shift in emphasis reflecting the deep-seated anxiety that now fueled his every endeavor. He scaled the corporate ladder with breathtaking speed, each promotion a rung higher on the precarious scaffolding of his self-esteem. He built a tech empire from a small garage startup, his brilliance undeniable, his work ethic legendary. His days were a blur of high-stakes meetings, international travel, and strategic maneuvers that solidified his position as a titan of industry. He owned penthouse apartments, vintage cars, and an art collection that drew gasps from connoisseurs. On the surface, Arthur was the epitome of success, the living embodiment of the American dream. Yet, beneath the veneer of triumph, a gnawing emptiness persisted, a feeling he could never quite shake. He would stand on the precipice of another monumental achievement, surrounded by applause and adulation, and instead of joy, he would feel a fleeting surge of anxiety, a whisper of "what's next? Is this enough?" It was never enough. The goalposts kept shifting, receding further into the distance with each capture. His relationships, too, suffered. He approached intimacy with the same strategic intensity he applied to business, analyzing, dissecting, and ultimately finding fault, for no one could truly fill the void that lay within. His driven nature, while externally impressive, became a shield against true connection, a constant projection of his internal belief that he was inherently flawed and needed to compensate through relentless achievement. This was a classic manifestation of ego projection, attributing his own deep-seated insecurity onto the perceived shortcomings of others, creating distance where intimacy should have blossomed. The relentless pace began to take its toll. Sleep became an elusive luxury, replaced by restless nights spent strategizing or replaying perceived failures. His once formidable physical energy waned, replaced by a constant hum of fatigue. He found himself increasingly irritable, snapping at subordinates, dismissing friends, and retreating further into the isolated fortress of his work. He was a machine, finely tuned for output, but utterly devoid of inner peace. The climax of this self-inflicted torment arrived not with a spectacular failure, but with a quiet, mundane moment. He had just closed the biggest deal of his career, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that would cement his legacy. His team popped champagne, cheering his name, and for a split second, he felt a flicker of something akin to satisfaction. Then, he went home to his sprawling, empty penthouse, ordered takeout, and sat in silence, staring at the panoramic city lights. And in that vast quiet, the emptiness roared. It was louder than the cheers, more insistent than the congratulations. It was the terrifying realization that all his life, he had been building monuments to a self he didn't believe was worthy, trying to earn a love he felt he hadn't received, a validation that had to come from within. He had achieved everything, and yet he felt absolutely nothing. In that profound silence, a different kind of voice began to emerge from the depths of his being, a whisper from his anima, the often neglected feminine principle within his psyche that yearned for connection, for emotional nourishment, for a softer, more integrated existence beyond the rigid confines of relentless striving. It was the quiet yearning for rest, for genuine feeling, for the simple beauty of being rather than constantly doing. He suddenly felt an overwhelming weariness, not just physical exhaustion, but a spiritual depletion that reached to his very core. He had been running a race he could never win, for the finish line was not external but internal. The immense achievement felt hollow, a trophy in an empty room, unable to fill the profound loneliness he had unknowingly cultivated. Arthur's narrative lays bare the insidious grip of the perfectionist archetype, a man whose relentless drive for external validation became a substitute for an unaddressed wound of inadequacy. His life was a testament to the shadows cast by a fear of not being enough, where every achievement was a desperate attempt to silence the internal critic and earn a conditional love. This relentless pursuit of external markers of success, while outwardly impressive, masked a profound inner void, a classic case of ego projection where his own unacknowledged feelings of insufficiency were projected onto the world, leading to a relentless pursuit of more. His profound emptiness, even at the zenith of his accomplishments, underscores a fundamental psychological truth. True self-worth cannot be accumulated from external sources. It must be cultivated from within. For you, perhaps, this story resonates with the quiet anxiety that drives you to overachieve, to constantly prove your worth, to silence the nagging voice that whispers of inadequacy. Are you, like Arthur, building a life that looks magnificent on the outside, but feels hollow within? The ancient Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius, understood the ephemeral nature of external praise, reminding us that it is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. True living begins when you cease to be a slave to external validation and start to cultivate an authentic relationship with yourself. The path to healing involves a radical shift from doing to being. This isn't about abandoning ambition, but rather about reorienting your motivations. Begin by examining the source of your drive. Is it genuine passion, or is it a desperate attempt to fill an unacknowledged emotional deficit? Practice shadow work by confronting the underlying fears that fuel your relentless striving. What are you truly afraid of if you slow down? If you don't achieve the next big thing? If you allow yourself to simply be? Engage in practices that nourish your inner world, rather than solely focusing on external output. This could be mindfulness, spending time in nature, pursuing creative endeavors without the pressure of perfection, or simply allowing yourself moments of stillness without judgment. Just as Arthur found a quiet truth in the profound silence of his empty penthouse, you too can discover that the deepest wellsprings of worth lie not in what you accumulate or accomplish, but in the inherent value of your own unique, imperfect, and worthy self. Begin to rewrite your narrative, shifting from a story of relentless proving to one of compassionate acceptance and genuine self-worth. Do you know how many men carry the silent burden of loneliness, a profound disconnect that festers beneath a veneer of self-sufficiency and emotional detachment? This isn't merely about the absence of companionship, but a deeper spiritual isolation, a separation from authentic feeling and genuine connection, often born from an inability to express their inner world. The cultural mandate for men to be stoic, to suppress vulnerability, ironically prevents the very intimacy they crave, trapping them in an echo chamber of unspoken needs. This profound solitude, hidden in plain sight, becomes a heavy shroud, dampening the vibrancy of life and hindering the natural human need for profound belonging. Leo had always been the quiet one, the observer in the bustling tapestry of family life. While his brothers vied for their father's attention with boisterous tales and athletic feats, Leo found solace in the hushed quiet of the garden, sketching the intricate veins of leaves or losing himself in the swirling patterns of a kaleidoscope. His father, a well-meaning but emotionally distant man, interpreted Leo's introspection as shyness, a lack of masculine vigor. "Go out and play, Leo. Don't be such a wallflower," he'd often urge, his voice laced with a subtle disappointment that pierced Leo far more deeply than any direct criticism. Leo learned early on that his quiet, sensitive nature was not celebrated, but tolerated, a deviation from the accepted norm. He began to withdraw further, creating an intricate inner world where his feelings could exist unjudged. He cultivated intellectual pursuits, immersing himself in books and abstract ideas, finding a form of connection in the great minds of history, rather than in the messy, unpredictable realm of human relationships. As he grew older, this pattern solidified. He became a brilliant academic, renowned for his insightful theories and meticulous research. His papers were published in prestigious journals, and he spoke at international conferences, his intellect a beacon in the often muddled world of ideas. He had colleagues who admired his mind, and acquaintances who respected his achievements, but true friends, confidants, were conspicuously absent. He attended social gatherings, but always felt like an alien observing a foreign species, unable to decipher the intricate dance of human connection. He would offer logical solutions to emotional problems, intellectual analyses of heartfelt dilemmas, only to be met with blank stares or polite dismissal. The unspoken message was clear. His way of being, his internal landscape, was out of sync with the world. He felt like a solitary island, surrounded by a vast, unbridgeable ocean. This profound sense of otherness led to a pervasive loneliness, a deep-seated ache that no amount of intellectual triumph could assuage. He yearned for connection, for someone to truly see and understand the gentle, sensitive soul hidden beneath his academic armor. But he simply didn't know how to reach out, how to bridge the gap. The isolation deepened after his beloved grandmother, the only person who had truly understood his quiet nature and encouraged his artistic leanings, passed away. Her death left a gaping wound in his carefully constructed world. He retreated further into his work, using academic rigor as a shield against the crushing weight of grief. He lectured, wrote, and researched with a frantic intensity, but his eyes held a haunted quality, and his once vibrant inner world felt muted, gray. His health began to decline. He suffered from chronic insomnia and a pervasive anxiety that buzzed beneath his skin like trapped wasps. One evening, after a particularly draining lecture, he found himself walking aimlessly through a deserted park. He saw an elderly couple sitting on a bench, their hands intertwined, a silent comfort passing between them. A wave of profound longing, sharp and unexpected, washed over him. He felt an agonizing desire for that simple, wordless connection, that shared warmth. It was a yearning so intense it almost brought him to his knees. In that moment, the carefully constructed walls of his isolation began to tremble. He recognized the pattern, the life he had built around intellectual pursuits, as a refuge from perceived emotional inadequacy. He realized he had been projecting his internal fear of rejection, his deeply held belief that his true self was unlovable, onto the world, creating the very loneliness he dreaded. This was the dark side of his anima, the yearning for connection and emotional expression, repressed and unacknowledged, now manifesting as a profound emptiness. He understood then that true individuation wasn't about perfecting his intellect, but about integrating the discarded pieces of himself, particularly his tender, feeling side. He saw that his entire life had been an elaborate avoidance of this very human need for connection, a stoicism born not of choice, but of fear. The climax wasn't a sudden breakthrough, but a quiet, agonizing realization. He had been rich in knowledge, but bankrupt in love. He had denied his own longing for connection for so long that it had become a phantom limb, an ache he couldn't quite place. Leo's story embodies the poignant struggle of the sensitive scholar archetype, a man whose profound intellect became a sanctuary from a world that failed to acknowledge or nurture his delicate emotional landscape. His early experiences of conditional acceptance, where his quiet sensitivity was deemed a flaw, led him to suppress his genuine self, particularly his anima, the feminine principle within that craves connection and emotional expression. His resulting loneliness was not a mere lack of social interaction, but a deep spiritual isolation born from this suppression, a classic manifestation of shadow work left undone. The profound pain of this isolation demonstrates how a man's perceived strengths, intellect, self-sufficiency, can become the very walls of his prison when the authentic self is disavowed. This narrative speaks to anyone who has felt unseen, unheard, or fundamentally different, driven to pursue external achievements as a substitute for genuine connection. Perhaps you, too, have built intellectual fortresses or professional empires, believing that success would shield you from the pain of disconnection. But as Leo discovered, and as CarlJung so eloquently stated, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Your journey to wholeness, to genuine connection, begins with the courageous act of acknowledging the very parts of yourself you've hidden away. This is not weakness. It is the most profound strength. To heal this isolation, begin by turning inward with compassion. Engage in practices that allow for genuine self-reflection and emotional expression, however uncomfortable it may initially feel. Journaling, creative pursuits, or simply allowing yourself moments of quiet introspection can help you unearth the hidden longings and buried emotions. Seek out environments and individuals where authentic vulnerability is welcomed and celebrated, not judged. This might mean finding a therapist, joining a support group, or cultivating deeper, more honest conversations with trusted friends. Remember the wisdom of Dale Carnegie, whose principles emphasize the power of genuine interest in others and authentic self-expression as keys to building meaningful relationships. It is in sharing your authentic self, with all its complexities and vulnerabilities, that you invite true connection. Inner strength transforms, positive changes arise from positive actions. Whether it's walking mindfully, practicing yoga, or simply sitting in stillness, and positive thinking truly eliminates negative thinking. Let go of the need for external validation and embrace a peaceful inner rebirth. You are worthy of connection, worthy of being seen, and worthy of expressing the full spectrum of your being. Embrace the courage to be truly seen, and watch as the world begins to reflect that genuine connection back to you. Like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and share this video with others to spread positive values in life. Thank you for listening. The end.